Welcome to episode 4 of the Wood Whisperer video podcast. Now today we're going to tackle a topic that all woodworkers have to deal with on a regular basis, and that's selecting and buying lumber. Now these days, I just walk into the lumber dealer, I get what I need, and I walk out. But there was a time when it wasn't quite so simple. Now I remember vividly my first trip to a real hardwood dealer. I had just received my first table saw as a Christmas gift, and I was ready to build my wife a beautiful nightstand. I knew I wanted 3/4 inch birch, and I knew I would need at least a couple of boards. Well, when I got there, I was confused from the start. I couldn't even figure out where I was supposed to park, and then I couldn't even figure out where the entrance was. Already, I felt completely out of place. But don't worry, the worst is yet to come. I finally find my way in. I start looking at what appears to be the hardwood selection. I'm in total awe of the racks and racks of hardwoods in different lengths, widths, thicknesses. It was just amazing. So logically, I start looking for prices. Oddly enough, there were none to be found. So feeling like a real loser, I walk up to the counter where a very disinterested girl was sitting. I remember it like it was just yesterday. Hi, do you guys have a current price list?
What?
Do you guys have a current price list?
For what?
Birch.
What grade?
Good.
8/4, 6/4, or 4/4?
8, 6. What now?
8/4 is $8 a board foot for S4S. S2S is $7 a board foot. Blah, 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 blah.
What the hell is this girl talking about? It's like she's speaking another language. You know, she's actually kind of cute. Maybe I should give her my number.
So how many board feet do you want?
So to make a long story just a little bit longer, I picked up a bunch of boards and I hoped I had enough money to pay for them. Fortunately, I did. I drove home feeling a little bit shell-shocked and realizing that I had some homework to do. Now, hopefully after this episode, you'll be a little bit better prepared than I was when you make your trips to the lumber yard. Now, the first thing I'd like to talk about is thickness. One of the first things you'll notice when you buy hardwood is that the thicknesses are not marked in inches. Instead, a convention of quarters is used. For instance, a 1-inch board like this guy here would be referred to as 4/4, which is usually written as a fraction 4/4. And as we know, 4 divided by 4 equals 1. It's 1 inch. A 2-inch board, kind of like this guy here, is 8/4, and 8 divided by 4 equals 2, and so on through different thicknesses. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of wood is sold pre-surfaced, so a 4/4 board will actually be closer to 3/4 of an inch, and an 8/4 board is actually closer to 1 3/4. Now for me, I actually have a thickness planer and a joiner, so I prefer to buy my wood in the roughest form possible, and then I'll mill it to thickness myself. Now here's a question that jumps into the mind of just about every beginning woodworker. What the heck is a board foot? Now a board foot is essentially a unit of volume that's used for measuring hardwoods. And since hardwood generally comes in a number of different lengths, widths, and thicknesses, it's much easier to express their quantity in terms of volume. Now this also simplifies pricing for the lumber dealer. So how do we calculate board feet? Now I'd get into the mathematical details if we had the time and if it weren't so damn boring, but let's try to keep it simple. Now this example here is a board foot. I know it's a board foot because it says it right here, 1 board foot. Now I also know it's a board foot because it's 12 inches long, 12 inches wide, and about 1 inch thick. Now that's 144 cubic inches. So if 1 board foot is 144 cubic inches, all we need to do when measuring any board is to multiply the length by the width by the thickness, all in inches, and divide by 144. The result of the calculation is the number of board feet. Now armed with this formula, a tape measure, and a calculator, we could tackle any board foot calculation right on the spot. Now it's inevitable that one day you're going to forget your calculator. What's a woodworker to do? Well, if you memorize one simple example, you can always make a decent ballpark estimate. Just remember that a 4/4 board that is 8 foot long and 6 inches wide is 4 board feet. And from my experience, most hardwood is cut somewhere near 6 inches wide and 8 foot long. How wonderfully convenient. So let's talk about the different types of cuts that you might come across at the lumberyard. Now, logs are typically cut one of 3 ways, either flat sawn, quarter sawn, or rift sawn. Check out this diagram to see how each cut is made from the whole log. Now, most of the boards you'll come across will be flat sawn. This is the cheapest, quickest way for sawyers to cut the log into planks. Now, quarter sawing is a cutting technique that results in very stable lumber. It's very time-consuming and labor-intensive and thus results in a higher price tag. Probably the most common quarter sawn wood you're going to come across is quarter sawn white oak, which is revered for its fleck pattern which emerges when it's quarter sawn. Now, you'll find that the most common use for quarter sawn white oak is in mission-style furniture. Now, rift sawn boards are a lot like quarter sawn, but they're cut at a slightly different angle. We'll go into more on that later. Now, rift sawn boards usually have a very characteristic straight grain pattern on their face. Now, the easiest way I know to determine how a board was actually cut from a log is to look at the end grain. I've got a couple examples here for you. Like I mentioned before, the most common thing you're going to come across is a flat sawn board. You'll see it has a very typical sort of cathedral grain pattern is what it's referred to as. And you look at the end grain here, and it's pretty much horizontal. It's a little bit wavy. You expect to see some waviness in the grain, but I've drawn some lines here to really exaggerate what the grain pattern would look like. And if you see that, you know you've got a flat sawn board. Based on this sort of grain structure, when it actually absorbs moisture, you're going to get a lot of expansion in this direction. That's something that we have to plan for when we build our furniture, but it's something that's more of a concern with flat sawn than some of these other examples, and I'll explain that as we go through it. Now, a quarter sawn board, I've actually got a nice piece of quarter sawn white oak here. See these great ray fleck patterns here? This is the wood that's used in mission style. It's the hallmark of the mission style. And you can see why, especially once you get a finish on this or you fume it, it just looks incredible. Now, if you look at the end grain pattern here, we've got a nearly vertical pattern. It's about 90 degrees to the face of the board. In fact, if it's between 60 and 90 degrees, it qualifies, the rule of thumb sort of, it qualifies as a quarter sawn board. The interesting thing about this wood is it's incredibly dimensionally stable, so that when you build with this material, especially if you make a tabletop out of it, you can pretty much count on that tabletop staying pretty darn flat throughout the life of the table. That's why this stuff is used for things like barrels, it's used for flooring, it's just a very dimensionally stable wood. Now, a close brother to the quarter sawn is the rift sawn board. It's a slightly different angle than quarter sawn. I said quarter sawn was 60 to 90. Well, rift sawn is anything that's between 30 and 60. If you look at the grain pattern I have here marked out, we're at about 45 degrees, maybe a little bit less, but it still qualifies as a rift sawn board. If you look at the face of the board, you have this really just nice, I don't know, some people don't like it because it's too bland, but it's a very consistent straight grain line structure. And again, another popular wood to be used in flooring. So now that we know a little bit more about what we're buying, where do we shop? Well, the first things first, stay away from the big box stores. By that, I mean stores like Home Depot and Lowe's. Although it might be more convenient, you'll pay 2 to 3 times as much for half the quality and a ridiculously small selection. Keep those stores for the 2x4s. Now, the second option would be a store that specializes in woodworking supplies, such as Rockler and Woodcraft. These stores will have a much better selection, as well as some expertise from the staff. Unfortunately, they just don't sell the volume required to offer truly competitive pricing. Now, the third option would be online. I personally don't like the idea of mail order, since I like to see and touch the lumber before I buy it. But if you do decide to go with an online retailer, be sure to find one with a really good reputation and a strong online presence. You just can't be too safe online these days. And the fourth option, which I strongly recommend, is to find a local hardwood dealer. The easiest way to find a local dealer in your area? You guessed it, the Yellow Pages. Now, start by looking under lumber. I have a quick tip here to speed up your search. Generally, you want to stay away from companies with the words lumber or building materials in the name. These guys usually deal in general construction lumber. The key word to look for is hardwood. The hardwood dealers will most likely have a nice assortment of domestic and exotic hardwoods, as well as all kinds of sheet goods. And when it comes time to make the lumber run, Call all the local hardwood dealers that you know of and find your best price. Keep in mind that if you're a member of your local guild or association, you can frequently get a discount. Never hurts to ask. So let's finish up today by talking about what you should expect when you go to the hardwood dealer. And my little demonstration earlier was a true story, but I doubt your experience will be as bad. And if you're armed with information, you know what you want, you shouldn't have a problem. Now, if you're going to a new dealer for the first time, just keep your eyes open. Ask yourself, where's the office? Where are the other customers loading their lumber? Is there a sign prohibiting customers from entering the warehouse? Where are the hot girls? Or guys for you lady woodworkers? Now keep in mind that the bread and butter customers are usually the professional woodworkers, contractors, and all types of cabinet shops. And while I'm sure deep down they appreciate the business of recreational woodworkers, the whole scene can be a little bit intimidating to newcomers. So just find the office, ask for what you need, and they should be able to direct you to the right area and get you up to speed on their process. Now just a few last things to keep in mind before we go. Number one, not all dealers follow the same rules for pricing and for measuring. Number two, not all lumberyard employees are happy. Maybe it's the splinters, but a lot of these guys would clearly rather be anywhere else but at their job. Number three, check your receipt. Use some of my hints earlier to estimate your board footage and make sure everything was calculated properly. Lastly, number four, not all dealers will let you rummage through the wood pile. I know, it sucks. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Wood Whisperer. Armed with just a little information and knowledge, you too can easily avoid that lumbering feeling. And for more videos and helpful tutorials, please visit our website at www.thewoodwhisperer.com. And if you have any questions or comments about the show, drop us an email at thewoodwhisperer@gmail.com. Now, I'd also like to mention that if you have any woodworking questions at all, you can send them directly to me through the website. Just click on the Ask the Wood Whisperer button and fill out the form. Not only will I answer your question, but your email could very well be featured as our email question of the week, which basically gets you nothing. So now if you'll excuse me, I need to go build something.